All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce Tricia Harris. Tricia Harris' career began serving the legacy and family of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. During her 25-year tenure, Tricia rose from intellectual property license administrator to chief operation officer of the global public and private interests of Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy and the business and the legal affairs of his family. Tricia worked at every level of the family-owned estate of Dr. Martin Luther King and the nonprofit Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolence and Social Change, founded in 1968 by Miss Coretta Scott King to advance her husband's teaching. By the age of 23, Trish was the chief of staff and the youngest COO in the King's legacy history. She was responsible for overseeing daily operations, nonprofit management, community outreach, resource development, and creating long-term strategies to ensure that Dr. King's core tenets are properly interpreted and perpetuated by the current and future generations. Following her tenure with King's legacy, Tricia worked in the financial services and technology sector at Equifax. After leaving Equifax, she serves as executive aide to Ambassador Andrew J. Young, and also as executive advisor and writer for Dr. Bernice A. King, focusing on strategy, policy, and strategic communications. In 2019, Tricia founded Beloved Villages with Dr. King to actualize her father's dream of building a beloved community through real estate development and services. Tricia was featured in Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper and the Chattahoochee Times Free Press, Jet Magazine, Atlanta Tribune, Rollout Magazine, and recognized as a young and gifted under 30 in Essence Magazine. It is my pleasure to introduce Miss Tricia Harris.
Hello, Des Moines. How are you all? I hate that. Let me try to find, most of you have your cameras off, which is a total disadvantage when you're speaking. There you are. Hi. It's always very helpful. Hi. To see who we're talking to. You know, as Emmanuel, first of all, thank you for having me. As Emmanuel said, this is King Holiday, so it's our Super Bowl. It's a very hectic day for us. But Ambassador Young, who's now 88, he's like, Tricia, I can't see the people. Now I understand what he means. You want to know who you're talking to. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you, Emmanuel and Sue Whitty for the gracious invitation. Emmanuel, and I see you have yourself muted. Tell me how you want to walk through it. I mean, I started working for the King family when I was 18. I'm 20, I'll be 44 next month. It's about 26 years.
Go ahead.
I'm specifically groomed to actually operate the King legacy, because believe it or not, the business of King it is a nation, both from the interpretation of what Dr. King meant by building the beloved community and, you know, the elimination of poverty, racism, and war, all the way through the actual, you know, brick and mortar. You know, we have physical facilities downtown Atlanta. We have, you know, we're the most visited cultural tourist attraction in the Southeast. So all of those things, that's kind of where I cut my teeth. But when Emmanuel called me about your King program, and I was explaining to him the framework or how you might go about this program, he was like, well, Tricia, why don't you just talk? So I'm here. I can start from the beginning, but I would really love to understand, Emmanuel, from you, how do you want to proceed? Oh yeah, okay, so Charity wants to know why to mute. I'll unmute them and mute everyone, please. Can we go interactive? Can we just talk? You know, I've heard 4 ministers talk today, all in the name of King. And so, and I'm not a minister.
If
So,
you are interested in us letting people turn their mics on, we can do that.
yes, let's
If that's
totally
your
do that.
preference.
Turn your mics on, turn your cameras on if you want to. I have a hat on, so if you're having a bad hair day, go for it. Hi, there you are. Hi. All right, let's get going.
I can get mine on. I don't know what's wrong, but that's okay.
And either.
We thought that it would be great for you to actually discuss the 6 principles of nonviolence that Dr. King has.
Absolutely. So let's start from the beginning. So if you know, I'm probably one of the most well-versed on King, you know, just because after 26, and I was a licensed I Have a Dream, right? So if Community X organization, if you all, or if, you know, the Coca-Colas of the world wanted to license I Have a Dream in any context, that was kind of the core of my job outside of the charitable parts and public affairs parts. Oh, you have a hat. And so, let me turn this off. And so we've got, you know, the King, if I had to boil down the King, Dr. King in kind of a nutshell, his core vision and focus was all about, when he talks about his dream, ultimately it was about building a beloved community. And he believed that beloved community was not a utopian society. It's something that's actually achievable here on earth, but that the ends are pre-existent in the means, meaning that we cannot use violent means to achieve nonviolent ends. Look, my 76-year-old aunt is really persistent right now. Hold on, let me figure out how to turn her. How do I silence you? Clearly, I never used this. There we are. So he believed that in order to create the beloved community, the spiritual nonviolence was necessary. Spiritual nonviolence is effectively, I think in American society, we tend to come to a place where we believe that in order for me to win, you have to lose. Spiritual nonviolence teaches that the ultimate goal is reconciliation and brotherhood and sisterhood. And not in a, you know, let's just all hold hands, forget all evils and sing Kumbaya by the choir kind of way, but in a way that is tangible, that speaks truth to the issue, but that doesn't seek to defeat the person. Because if we can't come together where we address the issue and attack the issue, don't attack the person. If you attack the person, then it becomes impossible or very difficult to reconcile. And reconciliation is the goal, because we all live on the same earth. You know, we all have to learn how to live, in his words, live together as brothers, or we'll perish together as fools. So what I told Emmanuel I would do is show you all, take you through actually the 6 steps and 6 principles of Kingian nonviolence. During the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, what they committed to, you know, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and Andrew Young's and Ralph Abernathy's and, you know, Congressman John Lewis's of the world, right? What they committed to was a practice of nonviolence as a means for social change, as a method of social change. You know, Ambassador Young tells me all the time, it's not just because it was practical, because no matter what else, they were outgunned and outmanned. But it was also spiritually wise, because this is, you know, because you know, from a Judeo-Christianity perspective, the ethic of love that kind of transcends is at the root of where we have to be in order to actually have a sustainable society. So during the movement, during the 50s, and then it became more mature during the, let's say late 50s to early 60s, where they started to codify it. Like what is the philosophy? What is our overarching ideology related to any type of social change that could be applied towards, you know, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's climate, whether it's, you know, how we find this equilibrium within our political two-party system in America, the conflicts that, that hold us back, that prevent things like the elimination of poverty, which is kind of the core of, I think, a lot of our woes right now in America. It's a struggle against who gets to escape poverty, you know? And so they went about this process of kind of codifying, here are the 6, here's our guiding philosophy, there's 6, and then here are our steps in order to get there. And they figured that if they created this framework, then it would allow for application. It's the science of social change. And that's what made this civil rights movement possible. It was what made, and I tell Dr. King's daughter, Bernice, all the time, I'm like, I don't know if I could have, in the 50s and 60s, because they were taking some pretty brutal beat downs, you know. I'm not sure what, I'm kind of a reformed bully. Because I know the ends are pre-existent in the means, but I don't know how difficult it would have been to turn the other cheek, right? You're taking that level of beat down. But today, there's still similarities. It just manifests in different ways. Things like the cry for Black Lives Matter, as an example. And so they came up with this framework, the 6 principles and 6 steps. They didn't call it Kingian nonviolence, or in the King Center's terms now, Nonviolence 365 then. But they did put it down as a part of the formal training. So as they onboarded activists, new activists, who are principally younger, you know, because remember Dr. King, Ambassador Young, and so forth were only in their 20s, really, when the bus boycott, you know, kicked off with Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama. And all the civil rights movement is a series of campaigns, right? Montgomery, Albany, you know, Memphis, Montgomery, like there were a series of campaigns, and they kind of learned and improvised as they went along, and it ended up getting codified in the 6 steps and 6 principles, which I'm going to show you here if I can figure out which of my 5,000 windows I have open that I put this in. All right, there we are. I'm going to share my screen with you and just give you a visual. But I would really love this for this to be interactive, because I'm a talker, I'm Socratic, I can just talk. But if you, as we kind of go through this, if you, there it is right there, Kingian. All right, so I'm going to share screen, this guy. Can y'all see that? Oh, let me try to make it bigger.
It's a little small.
No, hold on. There we go. You see this?
Good job.
Right, we're cooking business. So, and these are the cliff notes. The King Center, if you go to thekingcenter.org, they have full out, you know, curriculum and training, but this is kind of the cliff notes version. So there's 6 steps and 6 principles, and you really kind of go with the philosophical or the ideological first. These are the guiding, this is the guiding framework for what made arguably what was the most successful, you know, human civil rights struggle in our history, right? You know, they felt like we need to understand it. Got principle 1 here. Can you all see my mouse moving when I move it? Or you just see the principles?
We can see the mouse.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yay, I got a pointer. All right, so nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. And I think the point is that a lot of people think about pacifism and nonviolence. And the reason we're going through this is because this was the core. If you wanted to boil down all of the history, the stories, the tales, the vision, you know, the adventures and the missions of Dr. King, it all came down to these core principles and steps. This is how they move forward. So nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people, making the point that often you think about nonviolence, whether it's physical or spiritual, and you think pacifism, so you may conjure up the concept of weakness, but the reality is, you know, Dr. King's words, we have to have the strength to love, the courage that it takes right? To step forward, today, with this divide we have even between, Republicans and Democrats and Trumplicans in America, what that looks like, the courage it takes in order to have the honest conversations to move us forward. It's a foundation important for us to understand that it takes courage. It takes the most courageous of us. And then principle 2, that the beloved community is the framework for the future, meaning that, we have to have, right now, I think what's happening is we're yelling at each other. If you just look at America, we're yelling at each other from different sides. We've not come together to say, we're going to have a common code of conduct with which we address each other, we address ourselves, and we are going to have, so no matter what our differences, at the end of the day, we know that it is, our goal is reconciliation as a community. And so then you get to principle 3, attack the forces of evil, not persons doing evil. And this is probably, I'm not sure if Mrs. King would totally agree with me, because the rest of it are necessary, maybe principle 6, but principle 3 is the hardest and probably the most important, I think. Because it talks about, you have to attack the forces of evil and not the person doing evil. Attack the deed, the misconduct, the error in judgment, but don't attack the person. So rather than you are a liar, maybe you may just be lying. Or in the words of Coretta Scott King, you might be suffering from a credibility gap, right? And so the point is that if we can, until we get to that place where we can attack the issues and not the person, we're going to continue on this downward spiral of violence. And so principle 3 in my mind is probably the most critical, because everything else is kind of anchored around it. And before I go into the 4th, let me just pause, because I'm talking 1,000 miles a minute. Any feedback, any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Hey, Viola.
Hi, and thank you for being our speaker. Thank you so much. I have a problem too with principle 3. How does one really do that? I'm not sure how you can do that, especially I'm still a bit traumatized from what I saw on January the 6th. Sure. And then seeing them in the chambers thanking, praising God and praying and thank you, God, and they have done all this damage.
Yeah.
They're actually in the chamber praying. So when you say, how does one do that? I can't see that right now. And notice I said right now. It may be a little while too down the line, but right now, that's difficult.
It is. Listen, I live in, and I have a dream where Dr. King says, "Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee."
Right.
I live on the Georgia side. I live in the Lookout Mountain district. It is 80% Trump, and I don't mean Republican. I mean 80% Trump, and 93% white. Right. And so I am surrounded, and they are very angry right now. Like, I have to be cautious leaving my house. Because this is the core of his base, right? If you want to look across the South, you could just replicate my county. And because it's true, I do a lot of interaction. When COVID hit, I signed up. I'm gonna take you to New York to get to California, but there's a point here. I signed up for all of these Facebook groups that are my community when COVID first hit, so I could understand what my neighbors were doing. And it's the first time I had ever interacted on that level. And out of, let's say, the 8 groups that I signed up for, I'm only now a member of 2, because I either got kicked out and blocked, or I resigned under duress and protest, to your point, because it was so, the fouls were so flagrant, and I was having a hard time, no matter what my training, right? It's, I can teach the teachers with King and Nonviolence, and I just, it felt so personal. That it was, and more so than anything else has ever felt, really. At that mass level, and especially because I'm surrounded by it, and I have an 8-year-old son who goes to school, We can't go outside because they don't believe in COVID. I mean, it's just layers. And so that's why it goes back to, again, Dr. King talking about us having to have the strength to love. The strongest of us will love. So I don't, listen, you were saying the cray right now, the things that are coming out of your mouth are, and because what to your point, and it's difficult because I have no question that even with the insurrection on January 6th, that they believed in the righteousness of the cause. I caught the prayer vigils, you know what I mean? And it's, and we can't stand between them and God. But what we can hope is that God reconciles, right? And so it's really getting down to I'll constantly ask the questions, okay, you believe that. Why do you believe that? You know, I've been called communist, leftist, Democrat. I mean, everything but my name, right? But why? And I can just step it aside. You know, you're big mad, I get that, but why? Why do you believe that? You're saying I'm a socialist, you're saying I'm a communist. Just define it without Google. What do you mean? What is our issue? And so you have to have the strength it's some absorption going on. I have to absorb, my capacity to love has to outmatch their capacity for hate. And that is it can be a daily, moment to moment. You know, I'm surrounded by ministers and I just ask them to pray for me, you know. It's one of the things that the King Center is actually, Bernice King, who is Dr. and Curtis King's youngest daughter, she's CEO of the King Center that they've set up. They have all of the multi-level training, but then within that, a broader network, because we have to have a community of practice. You have to practice self-care. It's it feels emotionally abusive, you know? It feels like mass cognitive dissonance, but if we can get to, and it's not fair, that particular first line work is not for everyone. You know, that's what Bernice and I talked about the other night. It is not for everyone. It is, because I'm liable to pop off, so I may not be the first person that needs to go into the village. You know what I mean? If you push me too far, you know. Now I'll regret it. I'll seek penance. I'll do all of those things, but because I know the ends are pre-existing means. But some of us have predispositions that are more akin to that when it's that rough. But most of the time, it's not that rough. What is really separating us as a nation? You know, some of the things, if we can just say, well, why do you believe what you believe? Help me understand it. If you first seek to understand before you need to be understood, that tends to go a long way. Just break it down for me. Help me understand you. Who was it? The mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. You know, you go ahead and let it out. Tell me why? And then go back.
Tricia, I think that really rolls into the fourth principle.
Thank you. I fell down the ADHD rabbit hole, keep me going, except for suffering without retaliation. Right, you're right. Without retaliation. If you were here, so if you can, you know, Dr. King said that unearned suffering is redemptive, right? If you did not earn that suffering, but you absorbed it for the sake of the common good, then it has a redemptive quality. It's much like sowing seeds, right? And so you're perfect, Emmanuel, right? Now, principle 5 is avoiding internal violence of the spirit as well as external violence. Internal violence is more of the spiritual violence. So the name calling, you know, we can name all day long all the wrongs and atrocities that happened at the Capitol on January the 6th. What we then have to understand is how spiritually where they are, where they came, you know, where they were coming from, to understand them. And so it's important to understand when you talk about Kingian nonviolence, it's not just the lack of physical violence, but it's also spiritual violence. The way that we speak to each other, the way we regard each other. You know, if you say, okay, you know what, you're really not my enemy. You may be acting like it, but I refuse to accept that Again, your capacity for hate is greater than my capacity for love. Let's get there together. And then of course, principle 6 is the universe is on the side of justice, which ties to Dr. King saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So it may take you a long time to get there. Sometimes we don't see it in our lifetimes, but that if you set yourself along this path, then ultimately justice comes back around. And so from a principles perspective, ideology, your philosophy in life, that's what nonviolence says. And those were the guiding principles that made the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s make sense and successful. That's why we have 3 of the enduring civil rights legislations on the books today that endure to this day. And then the steps, so that's principles. Before I go to steps, let's pause. Anything? How we doing? Hi, Heidi.
Hi, thanks for listening here. I just wondered if you could go a little bit, be more definitive about internal violence of the spirit, what that looks like if I'm acting out in the wrong way. What am I doing that creates internal violence of the spirit?
Yeah, I mean, some of this, and you understand that certainly the movement in itself was incubated through the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So a lot of this is very biblically based, right? But it still transcends across monotheism and to the extent that you believe in greater good, atheism in that way, right? The concept that, first of all, internal violence starts with self. What are we telling ourselves? What are we telling ourselves about who we are? What are we telling ourselves about our role? What are we telling ourselves about how we receive what's being given to us, particularly if they are on the opposite end of the spectrum? I literally, I mean, it's funny that it's interesting, the mixture of this audience. I had to take a white people break about 2 days ago because I was getting it was like 6 or 7 different across social media. This is all on Facebook, like 6 or 7 different women in particular, like attacking me. And I was having a hard time. I was like, you know what? I'm over here trying to work and be kumbaya, and it's hard. But it starts with the gentleness of spirit that says, first love self, and out of that then manifests my love for this person who, particularly when it's tied to racism, Dr. King, Ambassador, they believed in, things like racism is a sickness, it's an illness, and so if that being the case, how do you address someone that is suffering from an illness?
Thank you.
Does that help? I mean,
That's helpful.
And so it starts with self and it goes to self to society, right? Both spiritual, the story, it's all about the stories we tell ourselves. Yes, even physical violence started with the story we told ourselves,
Thank you.
Okay, so then we go through the steps, and these are more, and you'll notice within this grid, it's basically saying that each step, you make sure that you do these integrity checks, right? With the principles that the ends are pre-existent in the means. So step 1, let's say with someone that you feel polar opposite with. Step 1 is information gathering. And that's literally what we said about before. Tell me why? Why? Tell me why. What do you believe? Okay, why do you believe it? And just check your opinion. You can always go get your opinion and bring it back. You know what I mean? Just divorce yourself of it long enough to really hear them. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Aryan Brotherhood. It's probably one of the roughest white supremacist prison ministries. Oh, I say ministry, but that's really kind of how they see it, right? But groups in the country, born out of prison. So the guy that was over Aryan Brotherhood here in Georgia, I became friends with, interestingly enough. But the first conversation we had, I was like, well, what do you believe? Like what, like, and he was their teacher. He's the one that taught the clever of them how to, that indoctrinated them. Why, what is it that you believe? Okay, explain it to me in great detail. Why? And then we had to create a space that was safe enough that when I say, okay, you're on, forget my language, but you're really on some bullshit. If we're gonna hit the battleground, look for me. It would not come down to that, right? That he could hear that I'm gonna lose my temper because of nonsense you believe, and in his mind, the nonsense that I believe. But interesting enough, because we both had a faith basis, we were able to have that level of dialogue. And so information gathering is all about them. If you can go all about them before you go all about you, then that's about half the battle, right? And then so then you come out of information gathering, and then you go into education, which is about, let me educate you about how my position. So first theirs, then yours, right? Ambassador Andrew Young, who's I'm his aide. He'll be, I think I may have said this already, he'll be 89 in March.
Wow.
And he's the last living of the inner circle from SCLC. He's tremendous. He's such a cut up. But former two-term mayor of Atlanta, U.S. Congressman, first African-American U.S. ambassador to the UN under President Carter. He's one of my favorite people, ambassador. And we talk about, he was never, during the movement, he was the one who never went to jail. They consciously made a decision. He was always, because he's always the one who had to get them out of jail. So he was always the one who would have to go in and speak with the white establishment to get them to, and negotiate the release, and in some case, incredibly inhospitable conditions, we're in the South, and so what he learned was, he's forever the diplomat, he's forever the ambassador. It was appropriate that President Carter named him ambassador because that's what he's been doing his whole career. It was bridging. And it was same thing. You information gather, you get to understand who they are and why they believe what they believe. And then once you do that, once you start explaining your position, you don't have to do it in an adversarial way. You can do it as, okay, here are all of our balls on the table. Let's negotiate, right? Let's talk about where our differences are and where we may be able to meet in the middle. We may never agree on 100%, but let's agree on a healthy enough percentage to move us forward, right? And so that's education. And before I go to personal commitment, are we good? Do you have any questions, comments? So personal commitment is about, and it's interesting that it comes third, but by the time you've learned who they are and then you've explained who you are or what their position is versus what your position is, you're going to have to really kind of double down in your personal commitment to the principles. Step 3 is all about the principles, right? You have your personal commitment to nonviolence because you're about to go into negotiation on things that separate you. And so you're going to have to say, look, I know that I have to be brave to do this. I know that the ends are pre-existing in the means, and our ultimate goal is to have this brother and sisterhood. I know I don't need to attack them. I need to attack the evil. I know that when they come with something crazy, I have to accept that suffering. You see what I mean? Without retaliation, spiritual nonviolence, internal, external, and that ultimately the universe is going to err on the side of justice. So step 3 is tied to reaffirming your commitment here before you start negotiating, because that's that's probably the hardest parts, right? You try to negotiate your position. You're entrenched here, they're entrenched there. How do we meet in the middle? This is what our nation is facing right now, right? This is what President Biden, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris are going to be facing, and with this nation coming forward. How do we enter into negotiation? But, and this is really important, and I'm gonna say this about Black Lives Matter, and even some of the, before we started hashtagging these campaigns, some of it coming rooted out of kind of the more traditional Black disciplines in terms of, you know, activism, there's a tendency sometimes to go skip negotiation and go directly into direct action. And it's a critically important step because that's where that's our savings grace, right? That is where we put all balls on the table. Can we agree that we're gonna try to work it out, you know? And it's, even if we don't get to all of it, can we agree that there is a framework that says it's gonna hold us together and we're not gonna go nuclear on each other, right? We're not gonna get so entrenched that we start communicating with each other. Direct action says, okay, I have tried to negotiate, but it is not working. And so I have to employ a level of social levers in order to make the cause make sense. And a good example of that is the Rosa Parks story in Montgomery. You know, the bus boycott, that was direct action, but that's after they had gone all the way through these steps. And that was early in the movement. They actually stumbled upon it without realizing that that's what they were doing. But when they said, we're gonna shut down, we're gonna employ an economic strategy to address this issue of back of the bus, you know, pay the same fare, but stand up, stand in the back of the bus, get off, even if it's at capacity. That level of transport, because transportation was key to livelihoods, right? Mobility, it was all about mobility. So we're going to shut down the bus system. We will create our own transportation network with, it wasn't just Black people, right? You know, a lot of white housewives, right? They're in Montgomery at that time, carpooling, driving carpools, because this person is working in this house and this, and they created their own transportation network. But that was only after trying to negotiate with Montgomery. And that's a good example of direct action. A lot of times today, what you'll see is, okay, we're gonna call a boycott. We're gonna call it an economic boycott, or we're gonna call this kind of boycott, or council culture. We're just gonna counsel you. But no one bothered to try to negotiate, right? No one tried to understand what they are, where they were, where we are, have the commitment to say, we're gonna try to work this out and try to negotiate. They went straight to the direct action. So direct action explains a lot of the challenges we have with council culture today. You know, it's not to say that some people don't need to be counseled to the extent that their mic gets cut off because they've been responsible with the mic, but it is to say that we would have tried we would have employed these other, you know, tactics, because that's all the steps are. These are strategies and tactics, and before we get to direct action. Because ultimately we get to step 6, which is reconciliation. We have to reconcile. We have to reconcile as a nation. We have to reconcile as people. If we are, because we're all on one boat, right? We can't live, you know, unless we're going to create some underground colonies or go to another planet. We all kind of live together, you know. And so how do we? And that's why on reconciliation, these principles are important. Particularly, you know, principle 5 about the spiritual violence, because the more spiritually violent you become in principle 5, the more difficult it is to reconcile in step 6. And that is, I've never seen, this is the first time I saw this matrix like this. I was like, that's helpful. That was helpful to me. Hope that was helpful to you. So at a very high level, and these are more, you know, we can talk about history certainly, and the movement, and the campaigns. But if Dr. King would have us learn anything else, if Coretta King would have us learn anything else, Vandrew Young would have us learn anything else, it would be how to internalize these principles and how to walk out the steps, right? That's all I got, Manuel. What you got?
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for breaking that down to us. And, you know, me thinking that I knew everything about King I could possibly know, I just learned something new today. So thank you. At this point, I'd like to move to the Q&A segment and wonder if anyone has any questions. Don't have any questions from chat. Okay, there are no questions from chat. So I guess you did an outstanding job at answering everything. Again, I actually thought that was Andrew Young that popped up. It was, but
It was a screenshot I took
Yeah.
earlier for his keynote with Gallup poll.
I thought he had joined
I was
the
joined before I
Zoom.
joined.
That was him.
That was him.
Again, Tricia, I thank you so much for taking this time and going over these principles with us. I know you have a very busy day and a lot going on, and it really means a lot to the patrons of Des Moines Public Library, as well as the staff, to work with us on this. So thank you so much. I also would like to thank the audience for taking the time to take part in this discussion. Without your feedback, it would not have made it a success. So again, thank you. Also, I would like to acknowledge, although we don't see them, they are here, the Forest Avenue Fringe Group and the Forest Avenue Library Brick Fund for continuing to support the opportunities to learn and engage in the community with everyone. So thank you so much. And then most of all, I'd like everyone to please take advantage of the book selections in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. that the librarians from Des Moines Public Library have created for you. Please visit our website. It is dmpl.org. And on there will be a book list of suggested reading books in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
What's on that list? Are Dr. King's books on that list?
Yes, Dr. King's books on that list. And the one that we talked about is on that list. It is Where Do We Go From Here? A Community in Chaos.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna send you, did I send you that ebook, Emmanuel?
No, you didn't send me that one.
That's the link to the King Center's, the King Center has, we have 2 gift shops in downtown Atlanta, but that's Dr. King's last book. And if Dr. King wrote 5 books in his life, I mean, there's, umpteenth hundreds of books about him. But he actually wrote books, right? Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos of Community was his last book that he wrote about 4 months before he was assassinated. And it's broken into where we are, where we're going, where we've been, where we are, where we're going, a description of the beloved community and world house, and then practical programs in order to get us there. When I first read it at the point where I could understand it, I asked Ambassador, I was like, well, why didn't you, it's like y'all didn't read the book, Ambassador. And he said, Tricia, it's not that we didn't read it, it's that at the time, we didn't understand it, nor did we have the capacity and capabilities that you all have today in order to accomplish it. It is a next generation, Time magazine called Dr. King the architect of the 21st century, not the 20th, but the 21st century, and it's coming out of that book.
Okay.
It's so worth reading. It's a harsh critique of the Black community and the chronic disorganization within our community. That's where we've been. We can't continue to repeat that. We have to organize our strength into compelling power. And then it goes into some very descriptive things. And I think if you read it, if you put that at the top of your, your librarian list, I would have probably been a librarian in the next life, right? You put that at the top of the list, it's well worth it. And if you share your list or email it to me, Emmanuel, if there's some others that might make some sense, I'm happy to add.
Okay, definitely will. We had some questions to come in. One is from Erica. I'm going to let her go ahead and ask her question. Erica, are you on?
Yes, I am here. I can't turn my camera on right now, but I just am wondering, when June happened and we had rioting across the world and particularly in the United States, protesting, and then some call rioting, some call it protesting. There was a lot of discussion among my white friends about how Dr. King's nonviolence and his embrace of nonviolence is used by white people to not actually address what needs to change. And I am just curious about if you have any thoughts about that or commentary on that, because I've noticed since then, since you can't see me, I am white. And I've noticed since then a hesitancy to talk about him, at least for me, because I don't want to be accused or of not listening to the problems. A lot of people saying things like, you know, yes, Dr. King advocated for nonviolent civil disobedience, but that doesn't give you the right to judge others and things like that.
I think that you should tell them to, you know, what I hear from, I think at the core is that your heart is in the right place, so they can really take a seat. I think what you're experiencing is that, first of all, during the height of the protests and so forth in 2020, that was the largest demonstration of from any civil and human rights campaign in history. 2020, and the majority were white moderates. White moderates drove and fueled Black Lives Matter last year. And it's, I'll have to find it. There's this article, like they tried to quantify the number across the globe, but particularly in America. What they came through is that 93% of those protests were nonviolent. They were in the best of the King tradition. It was so if you think about the sheer scope of the largest, you know, human demonstration for a freedom struggle in human history, that we only had 7% that broke out in violence, that's extraordinary. You know, it is a matter of perspective. I think too, what you might be experiencing, and I take issue with this, particularly in the Black community, there is a, particularly with white women, there was this, you know, this saying, okay, you're trying to co-opt the movement and now you're trying to make everything about you. And then now it makes you feel like you can't even talk, right? Which is utterly ridiculous. If Dr. King didn't want, the part of I Have a Dream, when he talks about our 4 little children and the content of our character, like he meant that. So you have every bit of justifiable right to say, this is where I'm inspired from. I'm always open to learning. I think what you might be experiencing is the sometimes hidden or oblivious bias that can come with privilege, you know, and it's a privilege that is so embedded that you don't see it. We see it because, look, my son is 8 years old and he's autistic, and I'm trying to figure out, when I have the talk with him about police, how do I even explain that? You know what I mean? And so, and that's a real thing. And so what you feel sometimes in the pushback is that, unfortunately, sometimes in our community, it's so pro-Black that it you know, Dr. King wasn't saying, first of all, race is a social construct. Ethnicity is real, culture is real, but the concept of us being in different races is Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 when we invented it, right? Americans' version of it. That aside, because even though it's a myth, our institutions are built on it. What you're feeling is a pushback that says that they're probably not evolved enough. Like there was a young woman at Spelman a couple of weeks ago I mean, she's, you know, beautiful white girl, right? She got accepted to Spelman, I think it was Spelman, one of the HBCUs, and she was so excited. And so she posted on Instagram, and I'm going to an HBCU. And oh my gosh, she got crucified. She was crucified by the Black community. And I'm like, y'all need to slow up. First of all, if you can get into Spelman, you can get into Harvard. She made a choice. She made a choice. And because she is showing pride in being a part of a community that ultimately we mean to be inclusive, right? We mean to be, to break down the walls of segregation. Ambassador just said it on his last keynote with Gallup. He was like, look, the reason that segregation made sense, integration made sense to them is because if we solve for X, if you solve for the least of these, if you solve for the least advantaged, it solves the whole, because you can't address that without addressing the whole. You see what I mean? It means all boats rise, right? It assures equity for all. So I would say to you that you're going to find, you know, even within the Black community, there are degrees of wokeness and evolution. I would not let that dispirit you in any way. You're probably just not talking to the right person. but you should keep on keeping on because it's because that's the point. That is the point.
Thank you. This is very helpful. It's sometimes like, because I didn't want to be in a place where I was using Dr. King to not listen to what people were saying. But I also felt like sometimes it's not like nonviolent civil disobedience isn't stupid. Like, I don't think that it's not warranted in certain situations. I'm not saying I'm qualified to say when it should be used and when it shouldn't, but I don't think we should just throw out the baby with the bathwater, if that makes sense, you know?
Not at all. And just because you're Black does not give you a monopoly on what Dr. King said. It's very important.
So we have one more question, and it's, how do you avoid internal violence?
Every day. Every day. Because I mean, think about it this way. Like when I had someone over the weekend, I had this woman say the most outlandish stuff to me on Facebook. Like, and I didn't even retaliate. I just let her have it. So then I got within our group, you know, I live in Trump Nation. So then, and it's mostly white women. So then I posted out, I was like, y'all, look, I know we're going to exclude our boundaries. We're the resistance in our group. But I'm going to tell you, and I took screenshots of what she said. I mean, it assumed I rode the short bus. It assumed I grew up in poverty. She was every level of offensive you could ever, every stereotype she might be able to come across for a Black person she ascribed to me. And I look at my life and I'm like, I'm one of the most privileged of us, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of nationality, right? Regardless of socioeconomic status. And it's, but what I realized, which we had to come to, and it was hard. Like I had to take a time out. I was like, okay, you know, my son has a parapro that I hired that comes here to the house to teach him since we're on lockdown. And I was like, I'm taking a break from white people right now. I'm having a hard time distinguishing. I'm having a hard time because but it's spiritual violence. It's the internal violence first, because as I conjure up all of these, you know, just malicious things that I could say to her, right? To at least knock her off a peg a little bit. It's like, don't talk to me with being sloppy with your words. That is creating internal violence within me, before I even get to her. So the internal violence starts with self. How am I be gentle with yourself, love yourself, and love yourself when you go against someone in that way, when you're trying to beat them down to such an extent, you see what I mean? It's violent. So you start there. Does that help? I hope so, because I may have talked in a circle, but that's what I think I mean. You can't control anyone else. That's exactly right. You can't control anyone else. It's only how you react. That's exactly, because that's where the power is. If they control how you react, then you've shifted your power. And Dr. King, it's a funny thing about, let me see if I can find it. I'll drop the link in. It's called Black Power Defined. It was one of his speeches. And I'm gonna paraphrase here, but basically he taught that power is the ability to influence basic decisions. That's all power is. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with station. It's your ability to influence basic decisions, and it's measured by the extent to which you do. So that's why when you think about even celebrity, the reason that there's power there, it has nothing to do with their celebrity. It's the fact that they can influence the basic, the day-to-day, the moment-to-moment, the unconscious decision, because it's so wrapped up in your way of being. You see what I mean? Your identity. Yeah, I'm gonna find the whole thing and send it to you. And so it's a matter of owning the responsibility for. Oh, perfect. All right, look, I'm dropping this in chat. But it's a PDF. It's the whole Black Power Defined. Oh wow, that's it's about 9 months before he was assassinated.
Okay.
When a people mired in oppression failed to realize their own their deliverance, and it's actually Black Power Defined is one of the it's an excerpt from his last book. That'd be good. I think that might be helpful to read. But you just have to understand what the definition of power is, and then be kind to yourself first. And the greatest kindness we can give ourselves is a loving self, because we have to come out of ourselves. You know, it makes me feel pretty shitty, unless I'm really mad, to be evil to someone, right? I'm not living my best life.
Got it. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, Tricia, I want to thank you again. We're coming to very close to the close of this. Got a couple more things I want to take care of, and then if there are any more questions, we can answer them. We have 6 minutes before our session may come to an end. So I just also wanted to promote the library's STEM kits and digital media. Please take a moment to visit our website or call a librarian to actually see what we can actually help you with to check out. Our number here is 515-283-4152. Our website address is dmpl.org. Please take an opportunity to see all of the resources that we have readily available for you. In closing, again, thank everyone for today. It has been wonderful, and this type of engagement and conversation is very rewarding for your mind, body, and soul. And it also, it's the, as they say, the soil for growth and evolving as a society. So thank you, Trish. Thank you, Tricia, so much for this. Letting everyone know that enjoy the rest of your day, embrace it, and remember why we're celebrating. Thank you so much. We have 5 minutes. Are there any additional questions?
Could I make a comment?
Sure.
Dr. King, one of my all-time heroes, and in many ways, I've been involved with him for a long time. Another one of my heroes is Mahatma Gandhi, which is where some of the ideas of nonviolence came from.
Absolutely.
He was once asked why nonviolence, why he advocated nonviolence protest and nonviolence trying to change society, what have you, correct wrongs. And he responded, in nonviolent action, I'm the only one who's going to be hurt. And I could be wrong. So the other person's not going to be hurt, even if I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that goes to the idea of being nonviolent in your spirit.
Yeah.
Yes.
It absolutely does. You're right. Dr. King often said that he got his philosophy and his spiritual undergirds from Jesus, but his methods from Gandhi. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And now with nonviolence, Gandhi succeeded almost individually in obtaining the independence of India.
Yeah. He absolutely did.
And it shows how powerful nonviolence can be. I've been involved in a number of nonviolent actions. I've gone to jail, not that that means anything. But
no, it counts. Jail is not comfortable.
I do have another question about like how we apply this in our current lives. I have a group of friends on Facebook that, and they're mostly white, but not all, who are basically kind of giving up hope for us to come together with white supremacists, which I don't think there's another term that fits. How do we go forward from this place? Because these people are smart, they're deep thinkers, and I've heard Jane Goodall say we can't create change if we lose hope, but I see people losing hope. And how do we apply this? Because I think there's so much potential here. It's worked so well, but it feels sometimes like it requires more faith than what some of us have.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't know. It's the first thing I thought about when I was watching the insurrection at the Capitol was if outside of Congress in that day and putting pressure, their chief target were people of color. If they had a target on the street, and I'm surrounded, right? And so I got "Don't tread on me" flags up and down my block. I'll tell you that at the end of the day, it's funny, Ambassador Young earlier, we have a friend that runs March of Dimes National, and she's based in DC, and she was like, you would not believe DC right now, the level of fortress that is DC. I mean, it is a war zone here. And Ambassador told me to tell her that he said he understands, but don't worry, that we're going to be fine. The resiliency of this nation, the character even and the promise of this nation are far stronger than the wage that has been warred upon us. I mean, even here in the county, like I've had people like they're cutting off cousins, sisters, moms. It's causing massive family divides, particularly in these are white families, right? Like they're like, we can't even, there's no conversation anymore. And I was like, well, but they have to live somewhere. Like, A, they're your cousins, but B, they have to live somewhere. I think we have to get to that place where if you go from the bedrock that racism is a sickness, but some of this is not a sickness, some of this is fear, America, our demographics are shifting so dramatically that what do we have, about another 10, 15 years maybe, where it will be majority brown. And if you look at poverty as a whole, the majority of people living in poverty in America are white, just by sheer number. You see, maybe not in proportion, but in sheer number. And so they hear things, and I get it. You hear things like white privilege. They're like, what privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, well, I can't hear Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Okay, well, when you're advocating to save the whales, it does not mean fish, guys. You know what I mean? Forgive my language, but that's not what that means. And so I think some of it is, it's a hard way. Like, you can't be, how do you be, as a Black person, you can't be prescriptive about something that is inherently within the white community in that way on the racism side. But what I do know is that it's not our intent to find unity with hate. I don't know how we find unity with hate. There is, not for nothing, but for those of you all on Facebook, there is a website. There's a group that I'm trying to help right now because Facebook has them locked up, called, let me send this to everybody. It's called White Nonsense Roundup. And this is cleanly the best. They have almost 200,000 members. And it's basically white people standing up against racism, against their families, friends, colleagues, and communities. And so if I'm having I tag them at least once a week. If I'm having a racial issue that's blatant racism, so now I got to break down why what you just said is racism. I can just tap out and tag them, and then they come in and they actually talk to them. And it is so, Mrs. King, Dr. King will be so proud. It's extraordinary what they've been able to do. They've got schedules and like the level of intervention and kind of socioeconomic integration kind of awareness you would have to have. It's an advanced discipline. There are these groundswells of groups. You may not find it in your immediate community, but they exist, and I think that we just got to, because it's going to take all sides. And honestly, some of the harder core to convert, they're going to hear it from you, Martha, before they hear it from me. Because what they're going to hear from me is a Black woman talking to them, right? They're going to hear, or not hear me at all. But that takes the tools, you know, and if you don't have the tools, then I don't know. I'm such a fan of White Nonsense Roundup, but there's a couple of groups like this, but that's the biggest one I know. It's 200,000 strong. They have full schedules. Extraordinary. That is, and it's national, and it's nonviolent. They're not attacking anyone. It is all about, well, let me educate you about what actual racism is. Let me tell you why a Black person can't actually be racist. We can be biased, we can be prejudiced, but why a Black person institutionally cannot be racist. Like, that's the kind of conversations that they have. And then just keep the faith and have some patience and be patient with yourself, you know? But always around if you guys want to talk. I love this. This was tremendous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Trish. Our time has come. We're actually 4 minutes over, but you know, with great conversation, time goes really fast.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you all so much. And Emmanuel, if you give me that list, I'll your book list.
I'll email it to you.
Okay, I'll add anything else that we want to add that might make some sense, but start with where do we go from here? Okay, and actually, right. Y'all, I'll do you one better for y'all to do the ebooks. Hold on. Just give me 1 second before you drop us. Oh, Bernice will be like, Tricia, you're messing up our King Center. The King Center is a charity, you know, but I'm going to drop y'all. For those of you who just prefer to read ebooks, copy. All right, there you go. You can download the book. That's his entire last book.
Thank you.
You're
welcome. Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Thank y'all.